The air was sharp that morning, biting at my face as I stepped outside my small cabin near Lake Clark in Alaska. Winter had been particularly harsh this year, leaving the lake frozen solid for weeks. The ice had begun to thin in places after a brief thaw, but most of it remained deceptively sturdy, hiding its fragile state beneath a snowy crust. My name's Eric, and for as long as I can remember, fishing on this lake has been my life. I grew up here, learned how to read the ice, and came to trust its subtle warnings. On good days, the lake is my ally, but on days like this, it feels like it's waiting to remind me just how dangerous it can be. That morning, the sky was a pale shade of blue, and the world was eerily quiet. No birdsong, no wind, just the faint creaks and groans of the ice beneath its heavy blanket of snow. I grabbed my gear and started toward the middle of the lake, where I had left my nets the day before. I was halfway there when I noticed something unusual in the distance. At first, it was just a dark blot against the white expanse, motionless and out of place. I stopped, squinting against the glare of the snow, trying to make sense of it. Then it moved. It was a bear. The sight stopped me cold. In the dead of winter, bears should be hibernating, safely tucked away in their dens. For one to be out here, wandering across a frozen lake, meant something was very wrong. I adjusted my footing on the ice and edged closer, my heart pounding. The bear was massive, its dark fur standing out starkly against the snow. It moved with a sluggish, labored gait, each step seeming heavier than the last. The ice beneath it groaned loudly, a sound that sent a chill through me, deeper than the cold ever could. Suddenly, there was a sharp crack. The bear froze, its weight shifting as the ice beneath its front paw gave way. I watched in horror as the animal struggled to pull itself back, its massive body creating more cracks in the fragile surface. The sound of splintering ice echoed across the lake, each fracture spiderwebbing outward with terrifying speed. Instinct screamed at me to stay back. This wasn't my fight. A bear in the wild, especially one in distress, was dangerous, unpredictable. One wrong move and I could end up in the water too, or worse, facing the full wrath of a desperate predator. But as I stood there, gripping my fishing pole like it could somehow shield me, something unexpected happened. The bear stopped thrashing for a moment and turned its head toward me. Its eyes met mine. I can't fully explain what I saw in those eyes. It wasn't just fear or pain. It was something deeper, almost like an understanding, a plea. The bear's struggles grew weaker as its body sank lower into the frigid water. I looked down at the coil of rope in my hand, then back at the bear. My heart raced as I weighed my options. Every instinct told me to turn around, to get back to solid ground. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't act, I'd be watching this creature die. "All right," I muttered under my breath, my voice barely audible over the creaking ice. "Let's hope we both make it out of this alive." The bear's eyes stayed locked on mine as I uncoiled the rope from my gear. My hands trembled, both from the cold and the weight of what I was about to do. The ice beneath me groaned faintly, warning me that even a single step in the wrong direction could mean disaster. I tied the rope to the iron hook I always carried for securing my nets, driving it into a thicker patch of ice a few meters behind me. Testing its hold, I gave the rope a firm tug. It would have to be enough. The bear's struggles grew weaker, its massive paws scrabbling at the jagged edges of the ice. Each movement sent splinters racing outward, the cracks threatening to reach where I stood. "I'm coming, big guy," I murmured, edging closer. My boots crunched on the thin layer of snow covering the ice, each step calculated and deliberate. When I was within a few meters, I threw the rope, aiming for the bear's front legs. The first toss fell short, landing uselessly on the ice. The bear flinched, but didn't retreat, its wide eyes flicking between the rope and me. "Come on," I muttered, pulling the rope back and throwing again. This time, the loop landed just right, slipping over one of its thick, clawed paws. The bear jerked, startled, but didn't fight. Instead, it seemed to freeze in place, as though realizing I was trying to help. "Good," I whispered, gripping the rope tightly. "Now hold on." Planting my feet, I began to pull. The bear was heavy, far heavier than anything I'd ever dragged across the ice. My boots slid, the slick surface offering little resistance, but I leaned back with all my strength. The bear kicked its legs, trying to help, but its movements were clumsy, water streaming from its soaked fur. "Just a little more," I grunted, muscles straining as I hauled the massive animal toward the edge of safety. The ice beneath the bear groaned loudly, a deafening crack splitting the air. My heart stopped as a large chunk gave way, sending freezing water spraying into the air. For a terrifying moment I thought the bear would go under completely. But then, with a final, desperate heave, it hauled itself onto the ice, collapsing in a heap just a few meters from the water's edge. I stood frozen, breathless, as the bear lay there, panting, its chest rising and falling in heavy, labored gasps. Its dark fur was slick with water, ice crystals forming at the edges. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then the bear did something that made my heart skip a beat. It turned its massive head to look at me, its dark eyes filled with something I can only describe as gratitude. Slowly, it rose to its feet, shaking itself off with a spray of freezing water. "Go on," I said softly, backing away toward solid ground. "You're free now." But the bear didn't leave. Instead, it took a cautious step toward me, then another. My breath caught, fear rising in my chest as I stood frozen in place. Yet there was no aggression in its posture, only calm. The bear stopped a few feet away, dipping its head in what felt like a deliberate gesture. I could only stare, too stunned to react. Then, with a final glance, it turned and lumbered slowly toward the tree line, its massive form disappearing into the forest. I stood there for a long time, the rope still clutched in my hands, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The lake was quiet again, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. I stood on the ice, staring at the spot where the bear had vanished into the trees. My heart was still pounding, and my hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of what I'd just done. I spent the rest of the day replaying the scene in my mind. Had I imagined the bear's deliberate gestures, the way it had looked at me before walking away? Surely it had only been instinct, a wild animal responding to its circumstances. Still, the memory lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual had happened out there. The next morning, I set out early to check my nets. The ice had hardened again overnight, and the air was crisp and clear. The sun rose slowly, painting the lake in hues of gold and pink. For the first time since the rescue, I allowed myself to relax, convinced that the bear had gone back to wherever it belonged. As I approached my nets near the middle of the lake, I noticed something strange. Lying near the spot where I'd pulled the bear to safety was a small pile of fish. At first, I thought another animal had dragged them there, but the arrangement was too precise. The fish were laid out in a neat line, their tails pointing in the same direction. I froze, scanning the tree line for movement, and then I saw it. The bear was there, just beyond the edge of the lake. Its massive frame stood out against the shadows of the forest, its dark eyes fixed on me. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. The bear didn't approach this time. It simply watched as if waiting for me to notice its gift. I took a cautious step toward the fish, then another. The bear remained still, its gaze unwavering. Kneeling, I picked up one of the fish, its cold scales glinting in the early light. A chill ran down my spine, though it had nothing to do with the temperature. The bear let out a low rumble, not a growl, but a deep, resonant sound that seemed almost approving. Then it turned and lumbered back into the forest, leaving me standing there with the fish in my hands and a question echoing in my mind. Was this its way of saying thank you? Days passed, but the memory of the bear's gift stayed with me. I couldn't explain it, and the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Bears don't thank people. They don't leave offerings, and yet that's exactly what it felt like. The incident didn't end there. Each morning, I found new signs near the lake. Once, it was a carefully placed pile of pine cones near the spot where I had saved the bear. Another time, a large stone had been rolled onto the ice, its surface marked with scratches that looked almost like patterns. I didn't understand their meaning, but the gestures felt deliberate, intentional. One morning, I decided to leave something in return. I brought a fresh fish from my nets and placed it near the tree line where I had last seen the bear. It felt strange, almost foolish, but something deep inside urged me to try. I stepped back and waited, my breath visible in the cold morning air. For a long time, nothing happened. The forest remained still, the silence broken only by the occasional crackle of ice shifting under the warming sun. Just as I was about to leave, I saw movement. The bear emerged from the shadows, its massive form moving gracefully despite its size. My heart raced, but I held my ground. It stopped near the fish, sniffed it, and then lifted its head to look directly at me. What happened next sent a shiver down my spine. The bear lowered its head in what could only be described as a nod, then picked up the fish in its jaws and retreated into the forest. That interaction became the beginning of an unspoken ritual. Over the weeks, the bear and I continued this quiet exchange. I would leave something, fish, berries, or even a piece of bread, and in return I would find pine cones, smooth stones, or other small tokens near the lake. Each offering felt like a message, a connection forming between two unlikely allies. As the snow began to thaw and the ice on the lake receded, I wondered if our strange relationship would end with the changing season. The bear would return to the deeper parts of the forest, and I would remain by the lake, my life as a fisherman unchanged. But something told me this wasn't the end. There was a depth to the bear's behavior that defied explanation, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it had more to show me. As the snow melted and spring awakened the forest, the lake transformed. The ice gave way to rippling water, and birds returned to fill the air with song. Life resumed its rhythm, but I couldn't stop thinking about the bear. Weeks had passed since our last encounter, and I began to wonder if it had moved on for good. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the lake, I heard it. A deep, resonant rumble coming from the edge of the trees. My pulse quickened as I turned toward the sound. The bear was there, standing tall against the backdrop of the forest. But it wasn't alone. Two smaller figures stood beside it, cubs, their fur gleaming in the fading light. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what I was seeing. The bear had brought its family. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The mother bear watched me closely, her dark eyes calm and unwavering. The cubs, curious but cautious, peeked out from behind her massive frame. Then the mother bear did something that left me speechless. She stepped forward, one slow, deliberate paw after another, until she reached the edge of the clearing near the lake. In her mouth, she carried a small bundle of branches and pine cones. She placed it carefully on the ground, nudging it forward with her nose before stepping back to join her cubs. I hesitated, then moved closer, my heart pounding. The bundle wasn't random. It was arranged in a circular pattern, almost like a wreath. At its center was a smooth stone, polished to a shine that caught the last rays of sunlight. Kneeling, I reached out to touch it, my fingers brushing the cool surface of the stone. It was warm to the touch, as though it had absorbed the sun's energy all day. I looked up at the bear, unsure of how to react. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. The bear let out a low rumble, her gaze steady and unthreatening. The cubs mimicked her, their tiny growls almost comical in their intensity. I couldn't help but smile. For a long moment we simply watched each other, a quiet understanding passing between us. Then, as if deciding the moment was complete, the bear turned and led her cubs back into the forest. I stood there until they disappeared into the shadows, the bundle still cradled in my hands. That night, I placed the wreath on the shelf above my fireplace. It wasn't just a gift. It was a reminder of the connection I had shared with the bear, a bond that had defied everything I thought I knew about the natural world. Spring turned into summer, and the forest came alive with the sounds of rustling leaves and flowing streams. I often found myself wandering the paths near the lake, always keeping an eye out for the bear and her cubs. Each trip felt like a quiet hope to see them again, but weeks passed with no sign of them. One evening, as the sun began to sink low on the horizon, painting the lake in hues of orange and gold, I heard a familiar sound, a low rumble that resonated through the still air. My heart leapt as I turned toward the tree line. She was there. The mother bear stood at the edge of the forest, her cubs at her side. This time, however, she didn't approach. Instead, she sat down on her haunches, her massive form outlined against the fading light. The cubs mimicked her, sitting close to her legs, their eyes fixed on me. I stepped forward cautiously, not wanting to disturb the moment. As I drew closer, I noticed something at her feet. A single, polished stone resting atop a bed of moss. It was perfectly smooth, gleaming softly in the warm light. She nudged the stone toward me with her nose, then looked up, her dark eyes meeting mine. There was no mistaking the intent in her gesture. This was a parting gift, a final thank you. Kneeling, I picked up the stone, its surface cool and comforting in my hand. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "For everything." The bear rumbled softly in response, her cubs letting out small, curious growls. Then, with a deliberate grace, she rose to her feet, turned, and began to walk back into the forest. The cubs followed, pausing only once to look back at me before disappearing into the trees. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the stone clutched tightly in my hand. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the forest grew quiet once more. Back at the cabin, I placed the stone next to the wreath the bear had given me months earlier. Together, they formed a small shrine of memories, a testament to the extraordinary connection we had shared. Though the bear and her cubs were gone, I knew they would always be a part of me. In their absence, they left behind something far greater than I could have imagined, a reminder of the bond that can form when we choose compassion over fear and the beauty that lies in the unexpected. Life returned to its quiet rhythm after the bear and her cubs disappeared into the forest. The days were slower now, filled with the familiar tasks of fishing, mending nets, and tending to my small cabin. Yet, the bond I had shared with the bear left a mark on me deeper than I could have anticipated. I often found myself drawn to the edge of the lake, where the forest met the water. Sometimes I would sit for hours, staring at the spot where I had pulled the bear from the ice. Other times, I would visit the shelf above my fireplace, where the wreath and the smooth stone rested, a daily reminder of that incredible connection. As word of my story spread through the nearby villages, strangers began stopping by. Hikers, fishermen, even wildlife researchers came to hear about the bear that had left gifts and the man who had saved her. At first, I was hesitant to share, worried that the attention might bring harm to the animals or disrupt their peaceful lives. But over time, I realized the story was bigger than me. It wasn't just about a fisherman and a bear. It was a story about trust, compassion, and the possibility of understanding between humans and the wild. One morning, a group of schoolchildren came to the lake with their teacher. They asked me to tell them about the bear, their eyes wide with curiosity. I recounted the events, the thin ice, the rescue, the gifts, and saw their faces light up with wonder. "Do you think the bear will come back?" one of them asked, his voice small but hopeful. I smiled, glancing at the forest. "I think she's always watching," I said. "Maybe not where we can see her, but she's out there, keeping her family safe." The children left with promises to protect the wildlife and respect the forest. Their enthusiasm gave me hope that the bond I'd shared with the bear might inspire others to see the wilderness not as something to be conquered, but as something to be cared for. As the years passed, I grew older, but the story of the bear lived on. I continued to visit the lake, always leaving a small offering at the edge of the forest, a gesture of gratitude for all the gifts she had given me. And though I never saw her again, I knew she was out there, somewhere, a quiet guardian of the wilderness. Our connection, fleeting as it was, had left an indelible mark on us both, a legacy of kindness shared across the boundaries of species, one that would linger in the quiet whispers of the forest long after we were gone.